All right, good afternoon. Welcome back here to Trader Minute. Great to have you aboard. Market up here about 3 points where it sits right now. We've had a gap down and rally, and then a little bit of sell after Fed Chairman Powell's comments. Especially when he talked about the balance sheet getting smaller, we saw a little bit of sell action come in, but the magnitude pretty small, and that's gotten bought back up fairly quickly. And it's just one where not a lot of what I would deem as massive, significant market movement here today. The metrics are still, fairly mixed here today. But things like the bullish percent index still remain bullish. You can see it just continues to climb up each and every day. Still a very low number. But the pace and direction of movement, still suggests that it's in a bullish position. And we continue to see the market, just kind of trickle on higher here overall. Now, I don't think there's any brand new reads to be made on the market or anything like that here today. I think it's about the same as what it's been, and we are seeing option compression across the board. Not to a degree where we can talk about things being cheap. But you see the VIX, down here around 20 and, significantly lower than what it has been. And you can see this in option pricing. I mean, it is very visible in option pricing. Some options that were going for $5-6 at stocks at these levels, today are going for $3 and $4. It's in many cases a 20 to 30% drawdown. In terms of just the implied volatility reduction in options. So a very big one. That tends to set up better trading environment for option traders from a risk reward standpoint. And having more options to be able to trade. One of the responses we have seen, though, are some spreads being really opened up. And, where market makers, the options are overall cheaper, but they're opening the spreads a bit more as there's still some concerns about future volatility to come into play, especially with earnings. And, you'll notice that if you go out and try to play Bank of America and you give yourself any time on the option's going to be fairly expensive because it's pricing in earnings. And a lot of companies, you'll start to see that, start to run into that here with them. So, it affects the delta and the delta there for the trade and, what you can make per exposure and all of that. But, you still can calculate and see how that, comes into play. Now, for the challenge, I have 2 positions on the board, and this basically, puts all my cash into play. First position I have is gold, and I bought GLD the other day. It rallied about 70 cents yesterday. It's down about 60 cents here today, right? And, this is one that we don't see in the futures market. We don't see even in GLD, the ETF. We don't see any kind of urgency of sell here. This is a pure currency move. You take a look at the FXE, and it's doing the exact same thing. Right, and it's been a while since I've had a trade have as many questions come in it as the GLD trade. And it reminds me of how many theories there are out there about gold and everything else. And yep, there are a million theories out there. And but bottom line, and you've heard me say this already, for me, this is an absolute pure currency trade. That's all it is. And you see this kind of rounding bottom here on the euro. If we pull up the UUP, it's a rounding top. And today is a little bit of correction to what yesterday was. So we're seeing that a little bit, here in gold today, down about 0.5%. With the FXE down about 0.5%. It's still, as far as GLD goes, it's still in that little, consolidation phase here. It's one where I think a move above 122 tomorrow on the GLD would signal, hey, buy more. buy more, get aggressive and go. That's basically what I think I can read out of yesterday and today's action, in terms of any kind of, major significance. But you'll notice with gold and, anything directional with gold, it can be very choppy. It can be extremely choppy, and today's just not one of those days that I look at and read much into. I know it affects option values and all of that, and sure, right? But I'm about flat on the trade here after a small gain yesterday, about flat where it sits right now. So kind of never any fun to give a little bit of a gain back, but I still think there's plenty of reward potential associated here. And then just recently, I bought some puts on Pfizer, PFE. And, I think this is one where if I waited 15 minutes, I could have gotten a little bit of a better price. But, here's Pfizer today. And if you look at Pfizer, you look at Merck, they're both doing something very similar today in terms of this, fresh breakdown below the 7-day moving average. One of the reasons why these are on my radar and have been, really comes down to the volume pattern. Volume pattern is strongly bearish here with them, and we have some talk within Congress and other bodies that have power. We have this talk about drug pricing and getting them on down and everything else, and we're seeing some of these companies do it to a little bit of a degree. So I've had them on my radar, watching, kind of just looking at the action, and we saw this breakdown below the 7 last week. And, this was with the market. It sold off with the market and snapped on back. And its rebound has not been nearly the same as, what the market rebound has been. And then today we get this fresh move back below the 7 and the 20-day moving average. And if you'll notice, it's happening on volume. The volume here today with 2 hours to go is about the same as the volume was yesterday here for Pfizer. So there's some hefty volume in here, and one that I expect that we'll see the 200-day moving average potentially come into play, and one that I decided to go after, buy a few puts on, and we'll hold these here into the close. Into the close of the market today. As far as, a great stopping point or anything like that, I don't think there's anything fantastic out there, for it. It is something where if it were to gap above the 7-hour moving average, depending on other things in the morning, I may have to go, just take a small loss, move on, type of a thing. But, this is something where I think there's significant downside potential, and, it has nothing to do with the market. Okay, please, the fact that I bought a put, please do not read, oh, Jeff's now bearish on the market. I know, my trades will get, micro read a bit, but, this has nothing to do with the market. This is in and of itself. This is a stock that you look historically, it doesn't care what the market's doing. Yes, when the market makes massive moves, it will kind of perform with the market a little bit, but in general, it is a company and a stock that, doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the overall market. So this is just that fresh breakdown below the 7, below the 20-day moving average, and going after that and looking for that further follow through, to the downside. There's some interesting open interest elements, for those that like to look at option pinning and stuff like that. But I'm not making I did not make the trade because of those things, but overall, we could see some of those, come to bear as we go forward here. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to go into the close. Most likely, barring a massive change here in the next 2 hours, I'm going to go into the close with Pfizer. Going to go into the close here with GLD. There's some interesting stuff out there. Honeywell pushing up a little bit more here today. Triple M, some of these industrials are actually setting up for some interesting risk-reward setups here. I couldn't argue against going and buying one of these, using today's low as a stopping point. Most of them, though, do have earnings priced into the options. As Honeywell, Caterpillar, they tend to be a little earlier earnings season, type of companies here, and so we do see that in there. A lot of the banks, earnings are priced into the options, but the options still aren't all that expensive, relative to what they were 2.5 weeks ago. So very big difference, very big difference there overall. Okay, was interesting to hear Chairman Powell talk about China. You don't hear it a whole lot where the Federal Reserve chairmen of various central banks around the world comment on other economies around the world, and we saw Fed Chair Powell talk about the global economy, talk about China, even talked about Apple, and said with what we saw from Apple kind of indicating maybe there's some slowdown in China. And I've listened to Fed commentary and Fed rhetoric and their press conferences and all of that for many years. Even going back to college where I had to start writing some papers on the Fed and what was going on with the Fed, and I'm jogging my brain to find the last time. And I'm sure it's happened, but it's just not something that's very common, where the Fed makes a comment about the individual earnings of a company and what it says about the economy of another country. I mean, that is something that it makes me almost wonder if one of the big concerns that the Fed has right now is losing market trust, right? The Fed has had market trust for a long time in a big way, right? And we've seen some of that trust slip a little bit, and this almost just kind of sounds like a comment or talk to kind of say, hey, market, I'm with you. I understand. I'm watching what you're watching. It's not just the Fed dot plots that I'm watching. I'm watching what you're watching. I'm seeing the earnings. I'm seeing the data out of China. I'm seeing the tariffs. I'm seeing how those are affecting things. I'm watching what you're watching, and I understand those risks. And that's what it kind of seemed like to me. In terms of his statement and Q&A and everything that went on here today with the Fed. All right. So anyway, gonna go into the close Pfizer, GLD, and see what the morning brings here with those, and we'll reassess as we go forward. Some of my favorite companies that I'd like to be a buyer of: Chipotle, GM, just a little high. We are seeing Lowe's pull back a little bit here today, so may present an opportunity as we go into next week, but not where it sits right now with the hourly. So I will, give it just a little bit more time there. Thanks for hopping on. Have yourselves a great one, and we'll talk to you later. Take care.